Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Trackside Conversations on the Prince Green channel. Remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Today we're diving into a story that rocked British jump racing, the suspensions handed down to jockey Dylan Kitts and racing associate John Higgins for their roles in a race-fixing scandal involving the horse Hilson. I am Jordan with my co-host Maya.
Yeah, and just to be absolutely clear from the outset, we're not here to accuse anyone of anything beyond what the British Horse Racing Authority has officially documented. Everything we discuss is based strictly on the BHA's published decisions, public reporting, and the disciplinary findings laid out by the governing authority itself. We're just breaking down the case, explaining the context, and examining what it means for racing culture moving forward.
Exactly. And for listeners who might not follow British racing as closely as some of our die-hard fans, let's set the stage. The incident happened on July 5, 2023, at Worcester Racecourse. The horse involved, Hilson, was running in a handicap hurdle, nothing unusual on the surface. But what happened, according to the BHA's investigation, was anything but routine.
Right. The BHA later concluded that jockey Dylan Kitts, only 24 at the time, and John Higgins, a 79-year-old associate of Hilson's owner, Alan Clegg, had conspired to prevent Hilson from achieving his best possible finishing position. Now, in racing terms, that's a serious breach. It falls under Rule J25.2, basically engaging in a corrupt or fraudulent practice.
And that's not a rule they trot out lightly, because the entire integrity of racing hinges on the idea that every horse is ridden on its merits. When that foundation starts to weaken, even in one race, you're talking ripple effects across public trust, betting markets, stable employees, owners, punters, and the sport's reputation globally.
So let's start with the key players. First, there's Kitts, a young jockey trying to build a career in an extremely competitive industry. And then there's Higgins, described by the BHA panel as a quasi-owner, meaning he wasn't the listed owner, but had a close association with Hilson's actual owner, Alan Clegg. Higgins, according to the report, had been heavily involved in managing or influencing the horse's racing activities.
And importantly, the BHA's findings say that Higgins orchestrated the scheme. They even used the word grooming, as in grooming the young jockey into a position where he'd go along with a plan to deliberately stop the horse. That's a loaded word, and it signals that the BHA viewed Higgins as the driving force behind the conspiracy.
Yeah, and grooming in this context means building trust, persuading someone gradually, making certain expectations seem normal, and positioning the person, in this case the jockey, as someone who would comply with instructions that violate the rules.
Exactly. And we have to acknowledge the power dynamics at play. A 79-year-old man with decades in and around the sport versus a 24-year-old jockey who's probably still trying to get rides, build owner relationships, and maintain a foothold in a tough industry. That disparity alone raises questions about influence and pressure.
And as the BHA ruled, the outcome was that on that day at Worcester, Hilson was not ridden to achieve his best possible finishing position. Kitts pulled him up before the finish, raising immediate concern among officials and punters alike. If you go back to the public reaction that day, social media lit up instantly. Videos circulating, people questioning the ride. It was impossible to ignore.
Right, because it wasn't subtle. The stewards lodged an inquiry on the day of the race. Kitts offered explanations, but the stewards clearly weren't satisfied. Within days, the BHA prohibited him from riding pending further investigation. That alone signaled that this wasn't a routine inquiry.
Fast forward through months of investigation, interviews, evidence review, and the disciplinary panel issues its ruling on November 24th. The hammer comes down. A 9-year ban for Kitts. And remember, it's backdated to July 13th, 2023, the date he was first sidelined.
9 years. When you think about the lifespan of a jockey's career, especially jump jockeys who face constant risk of injury, That's basically career ending. He'll be in his mid-30s before he could even return, and that's assuming he still has the physical capability, connections, or desire to come back.
Then you have Higgins, who received an even longer suspension, 12 years. His ban was backdated as well, starting March 12, 2024, when he was added to the exclusion list for non-compliance during the investigation.
Now, let's take a moment and unpack what a 12-year ban means for someone who is 79. Without speculating beyond the published facts, we can say this. It is essentially a lifetime exclusion. The BHA clearly viewed his role as more severe, more deliberate, and more central.
And the BHA's language supports that. They emphasize that Higgins orchestrated the plan and expected to benefit financially in the future. That suggests expectations of future race-fixing opportunities or financial reward based on influencing outcomes, even though there's no claim that future races were fixed, just that he anticipated the possibility.
And we should point out something that gets lost in the headlines. Hilson continued to race. According to the Racing Post, the horse ran as recently as November 25th at Hereford, finishing 10th in a handicap hurdle. So the horse itself has moved on through the racing system, even as the humans involved face long-term bans.
It really highlights how the industry separates a horse's welfare and race career from the human actions behind the scenes. Hilson didn't choose any of this. He was just the athlete on the day. But the humans manipulating the outcome forced the BHA to act decisively.
Now, let's zoom out. Race-fixing scandals are devastating for the sport, not just in Britain, but ultimately on a global scale. When one incident like this hits the news, even years-old controversies resurface in the public mind.
Absolutely. Racing depends on trust. Bettors trust that every horse is trying. Owners trust that their horses will be ridden ethically. Fans trust that the sport they love isn't riddled with hidden deals. When trust erodes, participation drops. Betting pools shrink, owners leave, and the entire ecosystem feels the shockwaves.
And we've seen that across different racing jurisdictions when even minor scandals break. Regulatory bodies worldwide have become more aggressive in monitoring betting patterns, rider behavior, veterinary oversight, and communication between owners and jockeys.
In this case, it wasn't betting patterns that triggered suspicion. It was the ride itself. Anyone who watched that race saw something was off. That's why the stewards acted immediately. And that's important because it demonstrates the presence of real-time oversight.
But here's the other side. People often assume that race fixing is some widespread network of corruption. In reality, cases like this are rare because the system catches most questionable actions early. The fact that this was dealt with so severely shows that the BHA is trying to protect the sport's integrity as aggressively as possible.
And it's worth mentioning, both Kitts and Higgins had the opportunity to provide their side during the investigation. The panel's decision reflects a detailed review, not a snap judgment.
Let's return to the dynamic between Higgins and Kitts. Again, without speculating beyond public findings, this case forces us to confront a wider issue. Young jockeys often navigate extremely unbalanced power structures.
Exactly. When you're 24, trying to make a name in the sport, you depend on owners and trainers to get rides. A word from the wrong person can make or break opportunities. And when a much older, well-connected figure starts offering mentorship or what looks like mentorship, it can become hard to push back.
That's one of the reasons the BHA came down hard on the orchestrator, because situations where older industry figures pressure younger riders can create an environment ripe for exploitation. If the sport wants to protect young jockeys, they have to make sure people who misuse influence face consequences.
So what does this mean going forward? For one, the bans remain in place unless appealed successfully. Hilson will keep racing under owner Alan Clegg's colors, and the BHA is likely to use this as a case study in strengthening educational programs for young riders.
And hopefully, it encourages more transparency, more writers speaking up if they feel pressured, more inquiries when something seems off, more accountability from everyone involved in a horse's racing career.
One thing's clear, this case wasn't just about one horse or one race. It's a reminder that integrity requires constant vigilance. And while the story is messy and disappointing, it reflects the governing body doing its job.
Before we wrap up, I think it's important to remember that racing is full of thousands of honest jockeys, owners, trainers, grooms, vets, people who dedicate their lives to the sport and would never be involved in anything like this.
Exactly. A single corruption case does not define racing. But acknowledging it, understanding it, and learning from it absolutely matters. That's how the sport moves forward.
Well said. And with that, we'll close today's deep dive. Thanks for joining us on the Rail Truth Podcast. We'll be back next week with another major story shaping the racing world.